of owning a cafe and other heroic deeds by Beware the Tistero. Chapter 87. Revelations. At 2000, most of their nearest and dearest had been able to meet them at the Noraneko, and with many of the customers who were simply customers and not invested enough to be considered family, yet, having left to give them privacy, Shouta stood next to Dabi at the head of the study table, with Tomura fixed to the other side.
What I have to say is kind of difficult in a lot of ways.
The teen began, the Tots and Gatskis similarly crowded near him around the table.
But it's something that I want to share with you and trust you with. Something that I'm asking you to keep to yourselves because what I'm about to say could put other people I care about at greater risk than what they already are.
He sighed, his turquoise looking to each of them in turn.
My name was Todoroki Toya. I was the son of the soon-to-be ex-pro hero Endeavor who isn't in the country right now. Not that we should note that, alright?
At the light gasps leaving the local pros, the dean swallowed thickly whilst he gave the boy's shoulder a gentle squeeze. From the tablet Hizashi was holding, Spinner's face peering out of it, the gecko quirk teen grumbled something under his breath about feeling awful for not being there in person. They all knew he'd make up for it when he returned from his vacation, though.
And because he is an abusive piece of shit, I faked my death and ran away from home, and I lived on the streets for just over a year before stumbling into this area and meeting a man who'd shown me the kind of love and affection I'd only ever seen in glimpses when I was allowed to visit with my mom.
He breathed. Damn, this never got any easier to hear, did it?
I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be who I am without him. And without all of you, and that's why I couldn't say anything before today, because my biological father is a powerful man. If he'd have known that I was alive, he would have come for me and punished Sho for helping me. I'm sure of it.
He murmured, his head shaking lightly.
Such a thing. I couldn't let it happen.
He stated, those eyes now locked with his.
Not that you would have cared either way, would you, huh? You would have just given in to get that special, wouldn't you, you crazy nuts? Okay.
Oh! Not being able to help himself, he pulled the boy into a hug, the Tats gasping and moving to join in the embrace with Tomura, the adults of the room quietly whispering to each other as he released his oldest ward and allowed him to be passed around their friends, their cafe family. God, he couldn't have been more proud of Dabi, and as his other wards surrounded him, he allowed himself to grin as he heard Spinner demand that someone get this tablet over to Dabi and make him hug it right now. His eyes roaming around the group of people the Noraneko's magic had spun together, his sense of hope renewed. And soon, hopefully, very soon, they'd be able to bring Rei-san here too. Then her children would follow, the damage they'd suffered repairing. Their family whole again, the malignant presence of Angie removed. The rest of the evening passed by with hugs aplenty, more food, and a very welcomed visit from Kenji-san just as they were preparing to close for the night. Everyone, with the exception of Inko, Mitsuki, and their sons, had retired to their own homes. The emerald and blonde-haired Tats were going to stay for a sleepover with Itoshi, whilst the semi-retired bro would bunk with her best friend back at Inko's apartment.
I know that I promised to visit first thing in the morning. However, I felt that the news I have couldn't wait.
Ushering him inside, his form then moving to his trusty coffee machine, Shouta quickly set up a fresh round of beverages for the adults and teens, whilst the Tots, all tuckered out after a day of play and anxiously waiting, snoozed on the gaming station's beanbags, the three of them not even rousing at the sound of the cat-eared bell above the cafe's entrance.
Those.
And with Tomoko and Oboro having seen to the cats before they went, whilst Nomori and Hizashi, who had sworn off any more customer service roles unless it was a dire emergency, had seen to the last few customers, he put a pretty big dent in tomorrow's prep work, which meant he could relax a little with his family this evening, thank goodness.
Yes. Thank you, Shouta.
The beagle-headed man sighed, his hands gratefully accepting the mug he was passed as he moved to sit down in Dabi's booth, The teen and his partner already snuggled there with a plate of mostly eat yakitori between them. They both looked as though they should have been asleep a week ago. I've accessed Osakawa Hospital this evening, and although I can't go into specifics, I have been authorized to tell you the following about your mother, the lieutenant stated after a deep drag of the black beverage he'd been given. After talking with her as extensively as I was able in the hastily arranged meeting my superiors arranged, she has given her official statement about the happenings in the house where you were retained. He said, his tone sympathetic. However, although it pains me to say it, she is currently under a section order, which cannot be reviewed for another 6 months. Dabikun, I'm unable to discuss the details with you, but you can visit her, he offered gently. Watching as the flame quirk user's eyes widened, Shouta leaned against the service bar with Mitsuki and Inko, the women watching on quietly, their features soft and infinitely sympathetic. Run, the oldest of the two teens breathed, his partner leaning against him comfortingly. Tomorrow afternoon at 14:30, you'll have a half an hour's visitor pass for a supervised session, the officer told him. Tamakawa can drive you there and back if you like. Yeah, that'd be great, his oldest ward nodded after a swallow. Do I have to go, alone? Flinching a little, the eatery owner drank from his pushing mug whilst the emerald-haired woman soothingly rubbed at his back. Why did everything good have to have a consequence in this world? I'm afraid that it's the hospital's policy that only next of kin and blood relations are allowed to visit patients on her ward, Genji replied, his tone considerate and shoulders deflating a little. However, there'd be nothing to stop Shouta, Tomura-kun, or anyone else from waiting for you in the car, he advised, his jowls trying to form a smile. Sighing quietly, the scarred boy inclined his head in understanding, his eyes closing a little. And how was she? He murmured. Is there anything we could do to help her like she'll help me? Can't we help her to get their marriage annulled or something? I mean, not that I knew or even met the Himuras or anything, but if she's not a Todoroki, that... Himura? Blinking, their group turned to Inko, her face paling as Mitsuki stood straighter, her crimson eyes narrowing as she shook her head a little, that gaze locked on the flame-quirked youth. Dabikun, I don't mean to pry, but your mother, is her first name Ray? Cocking his head to one side, his oldest ward nodded, and just like that, the two women balked in disbelief, their bodies moving forward as the rest of them looked on. Himuruma-senpai was... She always looked out for us in elementary school. She was like the big sister we never had. The emerald-haired officer gushed, her eyes tearing. We stayed in touch even when she left for high school. We tried looking for her when she stopped texting us. Oh, Damikun! She furthered, her eyes beckoning for him. Easily sliding off of the seat he'd been sat in, the boy was up and being held by them both as the rest of them watched, all of them trying to take in the scene burgeoning before them. God! Then he felt his tired eyes slanting to the officer, who, after another sip of his coffee, let out a quiet sigh and gave him a small, similarly tired smile that conveyed exactly how he was feeling. I'll come back first thing tomorrow, he offered while standing and moving, a parental hand patting the former Todoroki's shoulder. His empty cup was left on the table as Tomura similarly got up to join the embrace at the blonde women's beckon, the woman murmuring soothingly at the former Todoroki about the kind of person Ray was, how they loved her and had never forgotten about her. How could something that should be so wonderful be tarnished by the overall horror of the situation?
I'll see you to your car, Genji-san. Just give me a minute, would you?
He smiled, his tone a little strained from the emotion of it all, the other blinking at him and inclining his head in understanding. Then, a quick jaunt through the service bar and into his kitchen later, he snagged the coffee and walnut cake he'd made for the lieutenant. Once secure, he gently deposited it within a white black paw print scattered cake box and returned to the eatery.
Shouta-kun? You didn't have to.
The older man smiled whilst holding the door open for them, his eyes locked eagerly onto the box regardless.
I shouldn't really accept such things, you know.
He grinned, his stomach giving a loud rumble.
Hey, I'm just treating a friend who's very clearly off duty and in play clothes. He chuckled at him. So there's no bribery, no special treatment, no worries. And besides, it's not as though you and my jujitsu students don't buy plenty of wares anyway. So I won't tell anyone that this is a freebie if you don't. He told him, his eyes checking on the boys and their friends before walking outside into the humid night air. You're too kind, my friend, he murmured whilst taking the box and holding it close. And you attract far too much trouble for someone who only intends to do good, he added with no meaning half. Let's hope that the comic balance evens out for you and your family from now on. Yeah, he's open. He agreed, his shoulders rolling in a vain attempt to relax them. I genuinely don't know what I would have done without you coming here and cleaning up the previously poor policing, though, he admitted. You do a wonderful job, Genji-san, and I hope your superiors are aware of that, he said before his lips tilting into a teasing smile. Not that I'm suggesting even for a minute that you start thinking about applying for a promotion elsewhere, alright? Ah, Shouta-kun, those are my sentiments to you! Exactly. The beagle-headed man snickered as they made it to his car, the officer opening the door and making his way inside with a promise to see them again at 900. Re-entering his eatery and home, it was decided that the women would also stay over. He'd loan Inko his second pair of pajamas, since Mitsuki had her overnight bag with her already, and then they'd have one of their now famous campouts upstairs where, at his oldest ward's request, the women were going to share their stories about Himura Rei, Hiruma Rei, who'd been meek and quiet on the outside until she'd seen an injustice, who'd seen Mitsuki and Inko getting picked on by girls in her class and had stepped in, who made ice packs for them in summer, brought extra umbrellas to school for them in the winter, and sneaked them special European cookies from time to time. Imorare, who'd shared her lunches, helped them to study, and made sure that the women were safe and happy at elementary school and junior high. Imorare, whom they'd called Rei-senpai, and later Rei-ni. Then, with that decided, he'd sent them all upstairs, checked over his eatery, locked the door, switched off the lights, set the alarm, and followed them up. Once there, the sleepy tots were puppy-piled onto the sofa. Mitsuki made her way to the second bathroom, and the teens started amassing futons whilst he gestured for Inko to follow him. Talk about a small world, huh? He asked when the single mother scurried after him, his hands grabbing the t-shirt and sweatpants, their eyes lacking in the near darkness. I have always felt a special fondness for Dabi-kun, she returned quietly, her arms clutching the clothing to her chest. And now I know why, she murmured, her lips quivering. To think that all this time she was trapped in such a hell with that man. She bit out, her shoulders trembling. Quirk marriages are such vile, ugly things, and her family was so wealthy, traditionalist. She probably didn't have much say in the matter. She furthered, her head shaking, no doubt trying to dislodge that awful notion from her mind. Do you think that Yagi-san and the others, do you think that they can help her? Free her from that place before he comes back? I'm sure of it, my friend, he told her, a gentle hand reaching out for his thumb to carefully rub a tear from her cheek. Without them, we wouldn't have gotten this far. God, I'm not even sure we'd have learned about her situation to the extent that we have, let alone have access to lawyers who could fight on her behalf. He breathed. I'd have given up every yen I had to try and help, of course, but rationally speaking, I don't think I could have put a dent in the problem, you know. He tried to juggle. You sell yourself far too short, Joe, she sighed, one of her hands capturing his. Wherever would any of us be without you, she said, before her eyes glinting. But that's not for you to shoulder all of these things by yourself, she stated, her features becoming determined. When we get Ray out of there, when we save her and those poor Dill children, we will all be there for them, won't we? Nodding at her, his heart warm. They wrapped each other into a hug before he left her to use his room to get changed in. His hand absent-mindedly reached for his phone, his right brow cocking, when he saw a message flash up. Mimi-chan. Short-kun, I cannot get that dear woman off of my mind. Mimi-chan had texted only 15 or so minutes ago. Before I was a florist, I was a mental health nurse for more than 20 years, she'd furthered, his eyes widening. If Todoroki-san's case is investigated and her section ordered removed, I would be more than happy to share my home with her.
I have 3 bedrooms after all, and even though I'm no longer a licensed practitioner, I'm sure my credentials and experience would make me a fine candidate for the role of caregiver regardless of my age.
That was...
Is this something I should raise with Lieutenant Sugarami when he comes by tomorrow, do you think?
Fingers flying over the texting keyboard, Shouta carefully regarded Dabi, his spirits lifting. Having Ray living in the apartment complex which looked over their home with one of the sweetest, most amazing women he'd ever known overseeing her care would be the best possible outcome, wouldn't it? Aizawa Shouta. Mimi-chan, I can't put your generosity into words. He wrote, his body relaxing a little. Please, if you can, come by for 9 tomorrow to speak with Suganame-san, he advised. I'll have your favorite breakfast waiting for you, though.
With the evening spent full of stories, the morning snuck in with its usual rush of customers and sunshine. Then, at 9 o'clock, they arrived. Mimi-chan came first, and their forms sat within their booth. He'd ferried over each lady's favorite breakfast. Once fed, each of them tittering and fawning over him, he'd similarly welcomed the police force and plated up onigiri and coffee before sitting them at the table across the knitting nook. He'd then gestured for Dabi and Tomura to join the group, whilst he saw to the now quieting service bar, his ears straining to pick up what bits of conversation he could as he poured coffee, wrapped up scones, and cleaned the tables. Only time would tell if their venture would be successful, and as carefully as he could, he'd taken his oldest ward to one side and warned him against the dangers of pushing for too much too soon last night. Or, well, that morning. They'd stood there quietly chatting at 3, when the boy had woken, huffed out of his last nightmare, and trudged into their other living space for a glass of water. Concerned, he'd followed him, his footfalls heavier than usual, so that the teen knew he wasn't alone. The boy had listened to him, nodded, and pulled him into a hug to tell him that he knew. He told him that miracles were something he'd started to believe in, but not rely on. He'd softly whispered how grateful he was, how he couldn't thank him enough for everything. He'd also said that he wanted to visit the hospital by himself, tomorrow. He needed to confront the place and see his mother alone. It was something that he had to do. He wanted to do. But that had been hard for him to agree with, but this wasn't his call. And getting the teen to promise he'd have his phone on full charge so that he could call him if he needed anything, he'd negate it. This was Dabi's life. This was his mother. And he would respect that, of course. Dressed in the same suit he'd worn yesterday, he'd hugged Tomura, ruffled Hitoshi's hair, and allowed Tomo-ni to ruffle his as he walked out of the Noraneko. Sho, obviously not wanting to upset him, had cupped his shoulders, told him he looked great, and went on to bake in the kitchen. The man's ability to be so cool under pressure, so strong through adversity, and able to take on villains without flinching, all seemed to crumble into deep, gentle concern and empathy when one of his loved ones were facing difficulties, didn't they? And he was one of Shota's loved ones. He thought about that a lot. He reveled in it, too. Then Sansa-san had driven him off. He was glad that no one else was here to see him looking so nervous. Not that he cared, really, but, again, owning himself and his truth was something he needed to do. He wanted to stand on his own 2 feet. He wanted to walk into that room and see his mother as the young man he was, not that tired, frightened, almost broken child she no doubt remembered. He needed her to see that he was okay, that Enji hadn't corrupted him, ruined him, or destroyed him, as she'd no doubt thought. The hospital they arrived at looked nothing like any medical facility he'd ever seen before. Wisteria grew across the outside, the windows were wide but secure, and the frontage looked more like a traditional mansion-styled home than anything else. Wasting no time, he'd bowed to Sansa and walked inside with a confidence he didn't feel, his shoulders straight and eyes narrowed. At the reception desk, a politely spoken, seal-featured man had met him and leisurely walked him through a series of picturesque corridors accented with stock photos in gold frames, and slender display tables sporting large vases of bright artificial flowers. How fitting. Everything about this place was false, stilted, and sedate. It made him shudder. He had to get his mom out of here, to get her into Mimi Bachan's home. Now, before we go inside, Todoroki-kun, my name is Aizawa Dabi. He cut in bluntly, their eyes briefly meeting as the nurse bowed his head in apology. Aizawa-kun, he corrected. Both of them stood outside a door marked Visitor Suite B. News of your
resurrection, let's say, has caused a great deal of excitement, and to make things a little easier, the police force lieutenant has shown her several photographs, and explained your living situation. He said, she has been so much happier. Happier than I've ever seen her, but for everyone's safety and assurance, I need to cover a few things with you, okay? Now, you're allowed to physically touch each other in ways that are non-confrontational and non-violent, and as I'm only here in an overseeing role, I have signed a confidentiality agreement which will ensure that your conversations remain private. He tried to smile, his expression sheepish. We've had some very prestigious lawyers visiting as of late. Toshinori-ji and Mirai-ji were definitely some of his most favorite people now, weren't they? Thanks. Can we? Nodding in the affirmative, his shoulders relaxing some. The man gently rapped his knuckles on the door before sliding it to one side. Toya? Oh God, it was her. She was just as he remembered. Mom. He moved. Oh, Toya, my Toya, oh. Standing from her overly stuffed chair, seemingly without thinking, the woman was in his arms and holding him tight. My baby. Aiza.